What if I told you that not every marriage starts with love, but some end with a soul completely transformed? She was a virgin, 20 years old, and she was forced to marry a man known for having no soul, a feared general who knew war, but never knew what it was to love. Clara didn't choose this fate, but she chose to fight against the silence. In a world where feelings were treated as weakness, she dared to touch the heart of a man trained to feel nothing. Between walls, orders, and cold stares, something unexpected was born. Even he didn't see it coming. But is love strong enough to melt a frozen soul? This story will make you feel anger, tenderness, chills, and hope all in a few minutes. So take a deep breath and come with me. Comment below where you're listening to this story from. And if this touches your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone special. And of course, if you like the story, leave a like. It really helps the channel keep bringing content like this, because sometimes love enters where no one has ever dared to go. No one asked Clara Thorne what she wanted. The decision was made in a stuffy office in the capital, smelling of old paper and ambition, where her signature was just a formality. Her father, a respected senator, and her fiancé, General Alastair Kincaid, a man with an unreadable expression, shook hands as if sealing a military pact. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. A deal between power and strategy, between uniforms and silence. Clara Thorne, at 20 years old, with a heart still beating with innocence, was treated like a bargaining chip. Her purity, youth, and dreams, all given to a man who had never learned how to love, but who knew exactly how to win wars. His name was Alastair Kincaid. General, widower, no children, no soul, they said in the hallowed halls of power. Cold, unyielding, with a gaze that seemed to pierce through walls and human hearts. A man who didn't smile, who didn't hesitate, who didn't embrace. Clara heard the rumors. She felt their weight in her chest. But it was too late for any rebellion. On the wedding day, the grand cathedral was full of dignitaries, but empty of emotion. The guests kept their hands folded in their laps, as if the ceremony were just another diplomatic event. The white flowers, chosen by some secretary, seemed artificial. The bells rang, but didn't echo in the bride's heart. When Clara entered down the main aisle, she felt the dress weigh heavier than her own will. Her footsteps echoed on the marble, each one taking her farther from herself. The veil fluttered slightly, but not from the wind. It was from fear. Alastair waited for her at the altar, motionless, untouched, his ceremonial uniform impeccable, his gaze fixed, no expression, no words. When she reached his side, he didn't greet her. He didn't truly look at her. He simply nodded to the priest, as if confirming the order of a superior. And so, between empty promises and cold stares, they were united in marriage. There was no kiss, no applause. The sentence had been officialized. After the ceremony, there was no celebration. Alastair dismissed everyone. He got into his official car and drove straight to the formidable Kincaid estate nestled in the remote, mountainous region, where she would live from then on without even saying goodnight. Clara, alone in the limousine that took her to her new home, let her first tear fall. It wasn't just sadness. It was mourning. Mourning for everything she had dreamed of, for everything she didn't say, for everything that night, was buried with the white petals still falling from her bouquet. The Kincaid estate, when she finally arrived, looked like an abandoned castle. Tall, dark, imposing, as if it had been built not to welcome, but to dominate. The walls were made of cold stone, the windows large and silent. There were no pictures, no flowers, no music, only the sound of her own footsteps in the endless hallways. Her room was next to his, but the doors remained closed, locked, distant. That first night, lying in a bed that wasn't hers, with a ring that seemed to weigh tons, Clara closed her eyes and murmured just one question. How does one learn to survive, where love has been forbidden to enter? And there, in the dark, unknowingly, a silent promise began to pulse. A promise that still had no shape, but that was already whispering that something, no matter how impossible it seemed, was about to change. The altar was meant to be a place of surrender, of promises whispered between two hearts. But on that day for Clara it was a battlefield. It was impossible to ignore the sound of her own footsteps. Each click of her heels echoed in the cathedral like the beat of a war drum. She tried to hold her head high, but her eyes wavered as if searching for an exit. A side door, a chance to escape, one last no hidden in her throat. But there was no turning back. The church aisle seemed to stretch twice its length, and with every step the air grew heavier. All eyes were on her, but none offered refuge. And then she saw him. From a distance, Alistair looked like a marble statue, rigid, majestic, unreachable. His ceremonial uniform seemed forged in iron, the gloves immaculately white, the medals gleamed on his chest, but his eyes, they had no shine, only calculated coldness. A soldier waiting for orders. Clara's knees locked for a moment. Her body wanted to retreat, but her father's grip on her arm was firm, subtle, unwavering, non-negotiable. She reached him. Alistair didn't extend his hand. He didn't even attempt to meet her gaze. He merely turned his face slightly, signaling that the ceremony could begin. Humiliation ran down her spine like ice. The priest, visibly uncomfortable with the tension between them, tried to conduct the ceremony lightly, but it was like throwing petals into the wind during a hurricane. Nothing softened what was forming there. Two strangers sealing a pact under oath, with no love, no history, no permission to feel. When the moment to say, "I do" came, Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second. But the cutting look from her father sitting in the front row was stronger. She nodded with a choked voice. Alistair responded with a dry, short, "I do," almost military. The priest announced, "You are married." There were no applause, no kiss. Alistair didn't even turn to her. He simply led her to the exit with a minimal nod. The car was waiting, and the silence inside was even crueler than that of the ceremony. Clara felt the dress tighten against her skin like a poorly fitted armor. The bouquet rested in her lap, but it no longer made sense. She was a bride without celebration, a wife without a husband, a young woman without a voice. Alistair, on the other side of the leather seat, kept his eyes on the road. He didn't speak, he didn't move a muscle, until she dared to ask, "General, may I ask you a question?" He turned his face slowly as if responding was an inconvenience. "You may. Why did you agree to this marriage?" The answer came like a bullet. "Because I was ordered to and because I follow orders. I always have." Clara squeezed the stems of the bouquet tightly. The flowers began to wilt right there between her trembling fingers. She wanted to scream, wanted him to look at her, wanted that man to be anything but stone. But he just turned his face to the window, as if she didn't exist. The Kincaid estate appeared on the horizon like an isolated fortress, a place where the winds seemed to blow harder, where even the birds avoided landing. When they arrived, Alistair got out first, offering no help. He walked to the door, turned the key, and entered. Clara stayed behind for a moment, watching the door close slowly without waiting for her. It was just the beginning, and she already felt that the hardest war of her life had just begun. The door creaked as it closed behind Clara, as if the house itself knew it was trapping an innocent soul. The mansion, vast and imposing, felt more like a barracks than a home. The walls were made of smooth stone, with no pictures, no family portraits, no color. Only the hollow sound of her own footsteps filled the space, as if there were no past, no memory, no affection inside. Clara removed the veil with trembling fingers. No maid introduced herself. No voice welcomed her. It was as if, even though she was married, she was still an unwanted guest. The dress, now wrinkled from the hours and the weight of silence, dragged on the floor, making each step slower, more exhausting. Alistair guided her to the main hallway with a quick wave of his hand, without touching her, without saying a word. There he pointed to a dark wooden staircase leading to the second floor. "Your room is the first on the left. Mine is next door, but there's no need for you to approach." His voice was firm, sharp, without a trace of kindness. Clara swallowed hard. "And what about us?" "There is no us, Mrs. Kincaid. There is only duty." And he climbed the stairs. She stood there, waiting, as if hoping someone would change their mind. But the sound of his footsteps faded, and silence filled all the spaces once more. Her room was spacious, but inhospitable. Dark furniture, heavy windows with tightly drawn curtains, sheets that looked like they'd never been used. Nothing in the room suggested that a woman had just gotten married. No flowers, no perfume. Not even a change of clothes prepared with care. On the bed, there was a white envelope. Inside, a typed sheet with rules. Coffee time. 6:30 a.m. No leaving without an escort. Formal attire required for meals and public appearances. Physical contact or intimacy will not be required. Signed, Alistair Kincaid. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the paper for long seconds. Then, without thinking much, she tore it into thin strips. But that didn't erase what was written in her new reality. She was a prisoner of an arrangement, of a man who knew war but knew nothing about love. That night she dined alone. The long oak table, like a runway, seemed to mock the space between her and nothingness. The food came through a silent maid, who simply served and left. No exchange of glances, no words. Time seemed frozen there. The following days followed the same military routine. On-time coffee, instructions, closed doors. Alistair appeared occasionally, always with controlled steps, cold eyes, and short orders. There were no smiles. Not even a, "How are you?" Clara tried to make conversation. She tried asking about the day, about the places in the house, about anything that could humanize the man, but received only dry nods at most. She felt like a shadow, trapped between walls that didn't echo back. One morning, she tried to open one of the windows in the living room to let the sun in. She wanted to feel the warmth, to see the light reflect on something alive. But Alistair appeared suddenly. "Windows stay closed." His voice echoed like a command. "Why?" she retorted with a bit more firmness than she intended. He looked at her. "Because that's how it works here." And he turned his back. Clara clenched her fists. Indignation began to grow. She wasn't a prisoner of war. She was a woman, and she deserved to be seen. That night, she sat on the floor of her room for hours, leaning against the wall in her nightgown and bare feet, staring at the locked door between the two rooms. She thought about everything she had left behind. Her friends, the summer afternoons in her mother's garden, the simple life that had been stolen from her. And there, with wet eyes and a tight chest, she whispered to herself, "I will find a way to break this ice, even if I have to learn how to live inside the winter." The wind blew from outside, as if it had been listening. But the mansion remained silent. Clara is trapped in a gilded cage, facing a man made of ice. What would you do in her shoes? Succumb to despair or fight for every inch of your soul? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're on the edge of your seat wondering if she can melt his frozen heart, hit that like button. The following days dragged on like soldiers marching slowly. Nothing changed, nothing softened. Time in that house followed an almost military regimen, rigid, predictable, and without room for affection. Alistair maintained the same stance at all times. Eyes straight ahead, direct speech, calculated distance. He treated Clara like a subordinate, not a wife. No gestures, no touches, no concessions. Everything about him screamed control. And Clara was beginning to rebel. She woke up at 6:30 a.m. as the rules dictated. But she took her coffee 10 minutes later. She swapped the cold formal dresses for lighter, more colorful clothes, even knowing it irritated the general. She began exploring the hallways of the house, trying to find hidden corners, closed doors, traces of a past he might want to hide. One day, she barged into his office. It was empty. The walls were filled with military books, maps, medals. The desk, an old photo. Alistair, still young in uniform next to another man. No women, no family, only war. Clara didn't have time to leave. Alistair entered without making a sound. His gaze was sharp, lethal. "What are you doing here?" His voice was deeper than usual. She didn't retreat. trying to understand who I married. You seem like a riddle, and I have to live with it every day. He closed the door behind him. I set clear boundaries, Clara. You know them. Don't touch my things. Don't touch my past. Are you afraid someone will see you? She provoked, not looking away. The air grew heavier, but he didn't answer. He simply left. As always, that night she didn't sleep. She paced the room, opening and closing drawers, replaying the conversation in her head. She was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. It was like living beside a ghost, a real man but without a soul. Days later, a new rule appeared posted on the door of her room. No circulating the house after 10 p.m. Clara smiled to herself. It was clear he was trying to protect himself. But she was no longer the scared girl at the altar. She wouldn't back down. She would keep poking at that wall, until a crack appeared. Then came the first real opportunity. During lunch, she served her own plate and sat at the far end of the table. Alistair, as always, sat at the opposite end, miles away. Silence reigned. But this time she decided to break it. General Kincaid, I like orchids, she said lightly, but intentionally. My mother had dozens in the garden, all with names. She spoke to them like they were her daughters. Alistair chewed slowly, without responding. Do you have flowers here? She pressed. I have discipline. That's enough. She let out a low, almost ironic laugh. That explains why everything here feels dead. He set his utensil down, slowly, and stared at her. If you're not happy, you can go back to your father's house. No one is stopping you. Clara stared back at him. You are. With the silence. With the rules. With this prison you call home. Tension hung in the air. He didn't say anything else. He just got up and left. But that night, as she walked down the hallway, Clara noticed something new. His bedroom door, usually shut tight, was slightly ajar. It was a tiny detail, almost imperceptible. But to her it was like a white flag. Or maybe a test. And she knew exactly what to do with it. There was something in the vastness of that garden that called to Clara like an ancient whisper. As if the earth, silent, was asking to be heard. It was the only place in the Kincaid estate where she felt she could breathe without asking for permission. The garden was at the back of the property. A semi-abandoned field with neglected pathways, plants growing wildly, as if even nature had given up on being beautiful there. And maybe that's why Clara felt strangely at home in that silent chaos. She started going every day, alone, without warning, without following the mansion's rules. She simply walked between the twisted trees, the neglected rose bushes, the stubborn vines. There she spoke to the wind, sang softly to herself, touched the petals and made up stories. It was the only place where the name Clara Kincaid meant nothing, where she could still be just Clara. On a gray afternoon, the sky began to darken as she wandered through the wet dirt paths. She was distracted, picking a dried lavender flower when the first heavy raindrops began to fall. She ignored the warning. She kept walking. The rain came suddenly, like a long-held scream. The wind howled through the trees. The leaves danced, as if fleeing from something. Clara looked around and for the first time realized she didn't know how to get back. The paths all looked the same. The vegetation hid the mark she used to follow. She was lost. She shouted, called out. But the mansion was too far away, and the storm's noise swallowed her voice. The dress began to weigh her down. Her hair stuck to her skin. Mud slid down her calves, and fear, that old familiar companion, squeezed her chest again. Then, in the midst of the mist of water and leaves, a silhouette appeared. Tall, determined, walking with long strides, as if not hesitating. It was him, Alistair. No uniform, no mask, no protection. Clara! He shouted, looking in all directions. She responded with a sob. He reached her in seconds. His eyes, for the first time, weren't cold. They were filled with worry. What are you doing here? He asked, breathless, with the most human voice she had ever heard. I got lost. He didn't say anything. He simply took off his coat and threw it over her shoulders. The gesture was quick, almost instinctive, But it was right there, in that abrupt, clumsy, wet touch, that something changed. Alistair grabbed her arm and guided her back. They passed under low branches, slippery puddles, paths that now seemed darker. He didn't let go of her hand once, and she, even trembling, didn't want him to let go. When they reached the porch of the house, he released her. She was shaking from head to toe, but not from the cold. It was something else, something new that she couldn't name yet. "Why did you come after me?" she asked, her voice almost swallowed by the rain. He took a while to answer. "Because you didn't answer when I knocked on the door." Clara looked at him. That was care, a sign, a small spark in the ice. "I thought you didn't care." He looked away, clenching his jaw. "I didn't know I cared. Until now." She smiled. For the first time, sincerely. He took a step back. "Come in, you're soaked." "And you?" "Me?" He hesitated. "I'm fine." But she knew he wasn't. Not on the outside. On the inside. He was drowning too. But he still didn't know how to swim in feelings. And there, in the doorway, with the sound of the rain as a backdrop, something hung in the air. Promise still shapeless. The first spark of fire. In a heart used to living in war, the invitation arrived on a silver tray. Literally. Brought by a silent maid, like all those in the mansion, and placed on the dining table, between the bread and the silence. Clara read it with suspicion. Annual Armed Forces Ball. Mandatory attendance for officers and their accompanying guests. Accompanying guests. She knew what that meant. That very night, Alistair appeared at the door of the office where she was reading. He stopped, as he always did, without crossing the physical boundary between them. "The ball is tomorrow. Dress appropriately. We'll be there at 8 p.m. She raised her eyes from the book, meeting his gaze with a mix of defiance and irony. Appropriately. According to whom? He maintained his neutral tone, but his eyes betrayed a slight discomfort. According to protocol. There are appearances to be maintained. Clara nodded slowly. Of course, appearances. It's all we have. The next morning, she went down early to the city center. Escorted, as always, she entered a small, discreet store. The attendant smiled, surprised by her choice. Clara requested something specific. "A black dress. I don't want to look like a porcelain doll. I want to look real." When she arrived at the ball, everyone stopped to look. The ballroom was a temple of military power. Men in uniform, women in long dresses, golden lights reflected in crystal chandeliers. And at the center of it all, there was Clara, in a matte satin black dress, back exposed, and a daring neckline that didn't scream vulgarity, but control. Dangerous elegance. She didn't lean on Alistair. She didn't seek his shadow. She walked with confidence, as if she didn't need protection, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. The male gazes followed her, and Alistair felt it. For the first time he felt it. Jealousy. A young officer, a lieutenant, with clear eyes and an easy smile, approached. "Good evening, Mrs. Kincaid. May I offer you a dance?" She glanced briefly at Alistair. He was watching from afar, motionless, but with his jaw clenched like stone. Clara extended her hand to the lieutenant. "With pleasure." The music started. A slow rhythm, almost cinematic. Clara danced gracefully, but with a subtle provocation in her gaze. She wasn't a woman trying to attract attention. She was a woman showing that she had choices. Alistair watched. Every step, every turn, every restrained laugh. When the dance ended, he crossed the ballroom like silent thunder. He stopped in front of her and, without asking, took her hand. "Now it's my turn." The lieutenant stepped back, uncomfortable. Clara, surprised, felt his warm, firm hand on her waist. The music changed, and for a few minutes they danced as if the world had stopped, as if everything around them had disappeared. "Was that necessary?" she whispered. "Yes." His answer came without hesitation. "Are you jealous, General?" "No." He pulled her slightly closer. "I'm on alert." She smiled but didn't respond. The dance ended, and he guided her to the outside balcony. The night was cold. The silence outside was absolute. Only the distant sound of music. Alistair stopped, and for the first time he looked deep into her eyes. "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "This. You provoke me, you take me out of control. You tease me with the fire." Clara took a step forward, almost touching his chest. "Because I exist, Alistair, and you act as if I'm just a shadow of your duty. But I am a woman, with desires, with pains, with a soul." He looked at her with more intensity than ever. "And what do you want from me?" "For you to feel, for you to stop hiding behind that armor, for you to stop pretending I'm invisible." For a moment the wind blew stronger. The lights from the ballroom reflected in his eyes. And there, between duty and desire, between protocol and truth, something pulled them toward each other. But Alistair didn't kiss her. He turned and went back inside. Clara stood there, alone, shivering, but deep down, smiling. Because for the first time he had trembled too. The ballroom was packed, but Clara felt that only two gazes burned around her. The lieutenant's, persistent and smiling, and Alistair's, fixed, restless, almost wild. She had returned to the ballroom after the tense moment on the balcony, but something had changed. The air felt denser. The heat of the dance now turned into pure tension. The lieutenant approached again. "May I offer you a glass of champagne?" he asked with carefree charm. Clara smiled, took the glass, and accepted the invitation for another dance. Not to provoke, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen. She wanted for a moment to forget that her life had been put on pause inside a soulless mansion. But the general hadn't forgotten. Alistair crossed the ballroom, as if each step of his challenged the ground to bear the weight of what he was feeling. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something more primal, something he had never allowed to emerge. When he saw the lieutenant's hand on Clara's bare back, his blood boiled. "Enough!" His voice cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. The lieutenant stepped away immediately, visibly embarrassed. Alistair grabbed Clara by the wrist, not with brutality, but with firmness. "Excuse me," he said to those around them, and pulled her out of the ballroom. The balcony was empty. The night was cold, but what was between them was hot, almost combustible. "Have you lost your mind?" he said, his eyes sparking. "Is this what you want? To be the center of attention for every man in this room?" Clara yanked her wrist free with a sharp pull. "What I want is to be treated like someone who exists, Alistair. Not like a decorative statue in your ice palace. This is my world," he shot back. "And you're disrespecting everything I've built. Then maybe your world needs to crumble," she responded, facing him without fear. "Because it's made of walls, orders, absence, and I wasn't made to live in silence." He looked at her with anger, but also with something he couldn't even explain. Desire, confusion, fear. "You want to know what I feel, Clara?" His voice lowered, but gained weight. "You want to know why I keep my distance?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, facing him, her chest rising and falling. "Because you take me out of control. Because when you look at me, I see myself. And that scares me more than any war I've ever faced." She stepped closer, one step at a time. "So you're afraid of me?" "I'm afraid of what you might do to me." She smiled, her eyes misty. "Maybe then you still have salvation." He blinked slowly. The silence stretched between them. Clara, still looking into his eyes, raised one hand. She lightly touched Alistair's face. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply but didn't move, didn't pull back. When he opened his eyes again, she was there. So close, so alive, so impossible to ignore. But once again he pulled back. He turned his back and said, "Let's go back. We've caused enough of a scene for one night." Clara, without protesting, followed him. But inside, something had been broken. His wall was cracked, and she no longer intended to stop. That night felt endless. The silence between them, in the car on the way back to the Kincaid estate, was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Alistair kept his eyes on the road, tense. Clara gazed out the window, her fingers touching the cold glass, trying to understand exactly what had just happened. Something was breaking, inside and out. They arrived at the mansion near midnight. Alistair escorted her to the front door, but stopped before climbing the stairs. "You can go. I need air." She simply nodded and ascended the stairs. But she didn't go into her room. Minutes later, she descended again. In silence, barefoot, her dress still clinging to her body, her makeup smudged, not from tears, but from everything that had gotten stuck in her throat on that balcony. She walked through the empty corridors, past the garden still wet from the rain of the previous days, until she reached the pool at the back of the property. The water shimmered under the pale light of the moon. Clara stood there for a moment, watching the trembling reflection of the sky on the water. And then, without hesitation, she unbuttoned her dress, let it fall to her feet. She stood completely naked, fragile, free, and dove in. The sound of the water breaking the silence of the early morning was like a cry of liberation. She swam with long, slow strokes, as if each pull was pushing away the invisible chains that had held her since the altar. On the other side of the house, Alistair heard. He left the library and walked toward the sound. Something inside him told him not to go, to respect, to maintain the wall. But his body moved before his mind could stop him. He stopped at the edge of the pool. And there she was, the woman he tried to ignore, tried to control, tried to turn into a shadow, floating in the water, as if made of light and courage. Clara saw him, and didn't hide, didn't scream, just looked, without fear. "Are you going to stand there?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "Clara," he tried to speak, but his throat closed up. "Are you scared?" she continued. "Because I'm not." He clenched his fists. "You shouldn't be here. And should you be at war?" She shot back, swimming toward the edge. She climbed the steps slowly, in no rush to cover her body. The water slid down her skin. Her eyes were fixed on his. "What do you see when you look at me, Alistair?" He took a deep breath, struggling with himself. "I see something I can't control." She took a step forward, then stopped trying, and kissed him. It was a shock. The first touch of their lips made the world tremble. Nothing was soft. Nothing was calculated. It was hunger, anger, desire. It was everything that had been contained for weeks exploding all at once. The general tried to resist, but his hands found her waist before reason could react. He pulled her hard, and she responded with even more intensity. In that moment, he wasn't a man of war. He wasn't an officer. He was just a man, lost, defenseless, and she was the field where he could finally surrender. The kiss lasted longer than it should, but not long enough to calm what was inside them. Without saying a word, Alistair wrapped her in his jacket, carried her in his arms, and took her inside the house. Not to a guest room, not to the cold orders he always imposed, but to his room. And there, between sheets and unspoken confessions, something happened that neither of them dared to foresee. The surrender not just of their bodies but of fear. His room was another world. Despite the austerity, the dark wooden floor, the bed neatly arranged like a trench, there was one detail Clara would never forget: the scent. It was a subtle, woody fragrance, mixed with the leather of the armchairs and the faint aroma of coffee kept on the desk. Somehow it was part of him. Alistair placed her on the bed as if he were laying down a truth long denied. For a moment he hesitated. His eyes traced her face with an intensity that made her hold her breath. There were no uniforms now, no war, no orders, just a man in front of the woman who challenged him to live. Clara reached out and touched his chest. "Take it off." She pointed to his still-buttoned shirt. He obeyed. Each button undone seemed like a wall falling. When the shirt dropped to the floor, along with it went the cold persona he had worn for years. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was dense, deep, sacred. Alistair lay beside her, but didn't touch her right away. He ran his fingers slowly over her collarbone, as if feeling something he had never had the courage to experience. Then his lips found hers again. No urgency, no haste, as if saying, I still don't know how to love, but I'm trying. Clara surrendered, not in submission, but in conscious surrender, like someone who understands that this moment was more than physical. It was the blooming of something that had been hidden, suffocated, begging to exist. His touch was firm, but unsure, as if he were rediscovering his own body through hers. The sighs once contained now came freely, mingling with the heat, the sweat, the disjointed words that only lovers understand. When their bodies united, there was no spectacle. There was truth. There was fear and desire in the same rhythm. There were eyes meeting and no escape. There were hands searching and trembling, not from inexperience but from reverence for what was finally allowed to happen. And when it all stopped, when silence took its place again, it was different. Alistair didn't get up. He didn't pull away. He stayed lying next to her, his arms still around her waist. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if for the first time in years he was truly breathing. Clara watched him in the dark, and something inside her broke, not in pain but in compassion, because there she saw the man, not the general, the man with traumas, with unsaid memories, with loose pieces no one had bothered to put together before. She lightly touched his lips. I see you, Alistair. He didn't answer, but he squeezed her hand tightly, and for the first time, it wasn't him who commanded the silence. It was the silence that asked permission to stay. Clara woke with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the heavy curtains in his room. For a moment, she had the feeling that everything had changed. She could still feel the warmth of his skin on the sheets, the touch, the scent, the nighttime breathing. Everything was still there except for him. The side of the bed was empty, cold. She slowly sat up, pulling the sheet to her chest, trying to listen for any sound coming from the hallway. Footsteps, voices, coffee being made. But the mansion was immersed in complete silence, as if the previous night had been too bold a dream to last. She dressed slowly and went to look for him. Nothing in the library, nothing in the dining room, nothing in the office, until she found him in the garden, standing, his back to her, motionless, facing a dry rosebush that hadn't bloomed since the last rain. Alistair, she called softly. He didn't turn around. It was a mistake, he said before she could continue. Those 3 words hit her like a sudden storm. A mistake, Clara repeated, feeling her blood run cold. What happened between us? It shouldn't have happened. She took a step forward. Is that it? You feel something and then pretend it didn't happen. He finally turned around. His face was hard again, his eyes cold, as if the previous night had been ripped away from him by force. I can't afford to feel. But you did feel. Clara stepped even closer. I saw it. I felt it with you. Don't treat me like I imagined it. Alistair looked away. I don't know how to love, Clara. I never knew. I never learned. I've lost too many people to believe that this lasts, that it won't break me again. She was silent for a few seconds. It's not love that breaks, Alistair. It's fear. He looked at her, and in that gaze there was something between anger and desperation. I spent years surrounded by war, orders, control, every emotion repressed, every pain buried, and now you come and you mess everything up. Then let me mess it up, she whispered. Let me stay. Let me love. But he turned his back, his fist clenched, his body rigid. I can't. And he went back inside the house without looking back. Clara stood there, as if the wind had left her alone, too. The garden once welcoming now seemed drier, colder, more real. She went back to the room, sat on the bed, hugged her knees and cried. Not because of rejection, but because of him. Because now she understood. The general didn't need perfect love. He needed to learn that being loved didn't make him weaker. It made him human. And even with a broken heart, Clara knew it wasn't the end yet. It was just another wall, another escape. And she was still there, ready to fight. The silence between them lasted for days. Alistair returned to his military routine as if nothing had happened. The doors closed again. The words reduced to cold nods. And Clara, despite the pain, decided not to beg for scraps of affection. not out of pride but out of dignity. She spent her time tending to the garden, writing letters she would never send, and trying to understand why the man who kissed her with such desperation was the same man who fled as if love were a sentence. It was on a morning with a heavy sky that everything changed. The call came early. The housekeeper answered and rushed to Clara's room, out of breath. "Mrs. Kincaid, it's about the general." Clara jumped to her feet. The woman's face said it all. What happened? His convoy was attacked during an inspection. He's injured. He's at the military camp in the north. Still alive, but... She didn't hear the rest. She quickly dressed, ignored the driver's protests, ordered the car to be prepared. She grabbed the scarf he had left in the garden days earlier and held it tightly, as if clinging to that fabric could keep him breathing. During the ride, her heart didn't beat. It hammered. Clara had never truly known how to pray. Until that day. Hours later, when she finally arrived at the camp, she was stopped at the entrance. She wasn't military. She had no authorization, but that didn't matter. "I'm his wife," she shouted with tears in her eyes. "I'm Clara Kincaid, and if he dies without seeing me, you'll carry that guilt." The soldiers hesitated. They called a superior, and minutes later she was allowed to enter. The scene was devastating. Tents, smoke, soldiers wounded everywhere. But she only searched for one face. Just one. She found him inside one of the main tents, lying on a stretcher, his torso bandaged, breathing irregularly. There was dried blood on the side of his forehead, his right arm immobilized. A nurse was making notes beside him. She stopped at the entrance, out of breath. He was there and still breathing. The nurse looked at her and left discreetly. Clara approached slowly, her heart in pieces. "Alistair," she whispered. His eyes opened with difficulty, and when he saw her for a moment, the mask fell. "Clara." She kneeled beside the stretcher, took his hand. She felt the warm, weak skin, but still alive. "You scared me," she said, her voice choking. "You disappear. Push me away. Stay silent. And now you almost die?" He tried to smile, but his face barely responded. "I thought it was the safest way to protect you." "Protect me from what?" She squeezed his hand. "From love." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and with difficulty murmured, "Protect myself. From myself." Clara rested her forehead against his. "No more running, Alistair. If you survived this, it's because you still have something to live for. And I'm still here." He didn't respond, but a tear ran down the corner of his eye. The first one she had ever seen. And in that moment, Clara knew the war between them had not been in vain. He was coming back, not from the battlefield, but from within himself. Took 2 weeks for Alistair to sit up in bed without feeling pain. And during each of those days, it was Clara who stayed by his side. She didn't just sleep in the armchair by the tent. She read to him, washed his face with a damp cloth, helped change the bandages, made bad jokes to try to coax a half-smile out of him. Sometimes she succeeded. Other times he simply looked at her in silence. But now that silence wasn't a wall. It was comfort. It was a wordless confession from someone who didn't know how to use words to say thank you. Clara understood that, and she no longer expected more. The doctors offered the possibility of him being transferred to a hospital in the capital, but he refused. He said it was still necessary to set an example for the soldiers. But Clara knew. He wanted to prolong that bubble of time where finally he didn't have to be the general. He could just be Alistair. One afternoon, while changing the flowers on the makeshift nightstand, Clara asked, "Why have you always been so hard on people?" Alistair, with his eyes closed, answered without hesitation. "Because when you harden on the outside, you have the illusion that nothing can break you on the inside." She moved closer, sat at the edge of the bed. "Have you been broken before?" He turned his face toward her. There was something different in his gaze, a fragility almost tangible. "I lost my mother when I was very young. Then my brother was killed in an ambush, and I learned that feeling was a risk, that love was a trap, and I became good at building trenches inside and out." Clara ran her fingers through his hair gently. But no trench lasts forever. He took her hand and held it tightly. You got through the cracks. And I didn't know what to do. She smiled. Just stay, it's all I ask. He looked away, restless. I still don't know how to say certain things, Clara. Beautiful words, declarations. I don't know if I have that in me. I don't need a speech. I just want you to stop running. Alistair carefully pulled her, laying his head in her lap. They stayed there in silence. She stroked his hair, he for the first time allowing himself to not control anything. And then, in a hoarse whisper, almost breathless, he said, When you showed up in that tent, I thought I was dreaming. Clara smiled tenderly. And I thought I had lost you before I had you completely. Alistair closed his eyes. I'm not easy to love, Clara. I didn't come for easy. The tent became silent again. But this time, it was a silence that embraced. A silence of someone who at last begins to surrender. It was night when Clara felt she couldn't keep it inside anymore. The stars were clear in the dark sky of the camp, and the cool air seemed to whisper courage into her ear. Alistair was well enough to walk a few steps outside the tent. They sat together in silence, on a blanket spread out on the dry grass, watching the nothingness. And yet, sharing everything. He kept his eyes fixed on the sky, and she fixed on him. Clara took a deep breath, her heart racing but not from fear, from urgency. Alistair, she started, her voice soft but firm. I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to interrupt me. He slowly turned his face toward hers. I have no demands. I'm not here to ask anything from you, but I won't pretend nothing has happened inside me. Because it has. Alistair didn't say anything, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed that he already knew where this was headed. I fell in love with you. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara continued, even as her throat tightened. It wasn't at the altar, not in the first kiss. It was slow, in the cracks, on the day of the storm, in the way you saved me even when you pretended not to care. It was when I saw the man behind the general, the man who's afraid, who runs, but who even without knowing, protects me. She smiled, her eyes misty. And if you can't say anything now, that's okay. But I needed you to know, because I won't live this story halfway. Alistair looked at her, not with anger, not with coldness, but with a silent pain that hurt more than any shout. Clara, he said, lowering his eyes, I can't give you that. She swallowed hard. Why? Because I don't know how to love. Because what you feel is real. And what I feel is confusion, a hurricane, an emptiness trying to become shelter. And I'm afraid I'll hurt you, that I'll make you believe this can become something that maybe I'll never be able to sustain. Clara lowered her gaze for a moment. Then she lifted her chin as if deciding to go on even with her heart shattered. You know what's worse than being hurt by someone? He didn't answer. It's never having had the chance to try. She stood up, looked at him one last time. I didn't come to be your cure, but I won't be your prison either. And she walked away without tears, but with the certainty that she had done all she could. Alistair stayed there alone with the stars reflected in his eyes, and the echo of a confession he didn't yet know how to accept, but also didn't want to lose. The next night arrived with a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of escape. It was the silence of doubt, of conflict, of a felt absence of a desired presence. Alistair spent the entire day immersed in military reports, but he couldn't read a single page all the way through. Clara's voice repeated in his mind like a refrain. I fell in love with you. It was more than just a sentence. It was a key that had unlocked doors he swore he would never open again. By late afternoon, he went to her tent. He stopped at the entrance but didn't have the courage to go in. He stood there, listening to her footsteps inside, the soft sound of pages being turned, and he thought about leaving, but his feet didn't obey. Clara, he called, his voice hoarse. She appeared at the opening of the canvas, not smiling, but also not running away. What is it? She asked, calm but tired. Alistair took a deep breath. His hand trembled slightly. I don't know how to say this. His eyes were misty, though he tried to keep his face steady. But I feel it, And I'm sorry. I feel everything all at once. I feel fear, I feel anger, I feel desire, and mostly, I miss you. She didn't respond right away. She waited. I don't know if this is love yet, but it's all I have and it's yours. He took a step forward. Will you forgive me? Clara looked at him as if he were a lost child, asking for help without knowing how to ask. There was truth in it, an awkward surrender, but a true one. I didn't want you to learn how to love, she said softly. I just wanted you to stop running. Alistair stepped closer. He gently cupped her face with his hands, as if holding something too precious to break, and he kissed her. This time there was no urgency, no struggle. It was a kiss of peace, of surrender, of silent promises. Clara wrapped her arms around him as if forgiving, but also as if saying, now it's your turn to fight for me. They stayed like that, for minutes that felt eternal. Eyes closed, hearts in rhythm, and fears, for the first time, at rest. When they pulled away, he still held her. I don't know if I'm enough for you, Clara. I don't need a hero. I need a man who won't leave me alone in the middle of the battle. Alistair smiled for the first time with ease. Then maybe I can learn, she teased, to stay. She laughed, and for the first time since it all began, the night seemed truly starry, because sometimes the greatest courage isn't in winning wars. It's in taking off the armor and saying, I want to try. Alistair's recovery was progressing. His body was healing slowly, but his heart, that still resisted. Even though he no longer ran from her, there was still a silent weight hanging between them, as if something crucial had yet to be said. Clara felt it. She knew that the kiss had been a step, that the forgiveness was another. But love. Love required courage, and there were parts of Alistair still locked away. Parts he didn't let anyone touch, not even her. Still she stayed. One afternoon, they were in the makeshift garden of the camp. Clara was planting small flowers in repurposed pots, while Alistair watched, sitting beside her in silence. Why do you do this? He asked. Plant. He nodded. Because I like seeing something grow out of dead things. It reminds me that there's still time. He lowered his gaze. Clara wiped her dirt-covered hands on her pants and sat next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. It's okay not to know what to say, she murmured. I just want you to feel that you can be whole here, without needing to hide anything. Alistair stayed quiet for long seconds. Then he stood up, started pacing back and forth, visibly restless. You want to hear something I still don't know how to say? He finally said. But if I don't say it now, maybe I'll never be able to. Clara stood up, her heart racing. Alistair. He stopped in front of her, his eyes deeply tired, but alive, intense. I've spent my whole life losing things, Clara. People, battles, pieces of myself. I got used to the idea that everything that enters, leaves, everything that touches me, hurts. And then you came and you stayed. Even when I did everything I could to push you away. She couldn't respond. She just felt. And even with fear you stayed. Even with pain you loved. And I learned to breathe again by your side. He moved closer. I didn't know what this was. I never knew. He held her face with both hands. But now I know. He closed his eyes for a second, as if throwing himself off a cliff with faith. And he said, I love you. 3 words, 3 explosions inside her chest. Clara smiled with tears in her eyes. She didn't speak immediately. She just hugged him tightly, as if trying to anchor that moment in eternity. I've waited so long to hear that, she whispered. But the most beautiful thing is knowing that you got here on your own. Alistair pulled her close to his chest. I'm still learning, Clara. I'm still scared. And me too. But we have each other now. He kissed her, and it was different from all the others. There were no more walls, no more retreats. The war was over, and the soulless general, that was now just a man, whole and finally at peace. And now tell me, how many times have you pulled away from someone, not because of a lack of feeling, but because of the fear of not knowing how to love? How many times has pain taught you to build walls that only true love had the courage to break through? Alistair showed us that even the hardest heart can learn to feel. And Clara had reminded us that sometimes loving someone also means teaching them to allow themselves to love. Maybe you've been like her. Or maybe you're waiting for someone who insists on staying, even when everything inside you tells you to run. Tell me in the comments, do you believe love can transform even the coldest hearts? And where are you listening to this story from? If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone special. Because sometimes all someone needs to change is to be loved exactly when they think they don't deserve it.